Alright, so I'm coming back with episode 2 here tonight. I'm not returning from a float, so we're going to see probably my thoughts are going to be a little bit more scattered. I didn't have an hour to just sit there and organize everything in my brain, so hopefully this one is not even more all over the place than the last times, but we'll see about that. So I think the first thing that I was going to touch upon is just like after last time I was kind of reflecting upon it and noticing when I was listening to some more podcasts since then, just some of the production quality and hearing some of the content and like how much people are really putting into these things, and just like wanted to kind of put that out there that other people are doing a really amazing job, and it's given me a newfound appreciation for how much other people are dedicating their lives to getting content out there to people that I think really need to hear some of this stuff, and I'm glad that I've been able to come across it. I used to give my girlfriend Colleen like so much trouble about listening to podcasts. It was every other sentence. I felt like, it was like, oh, I was listening to this podcast, and now like that's kind of where I'm at, like talking about podcasts, and that's sort of where I'm coming from, like kind of doing my own thing here, so that I don't have to be saying that. I can just talk about it to the camera and not talk about it in conversations. Just get it out of my head. So it's great that other people are putting things out there, and I have this newfound respect for the challenges that come with it. The audio editing and coming up with what you're gonna say and trying to have it be coherent and getting your message across cleanly and concisely. So the topic that I was kind of thinking about for this episode was a book that I had been reading for it took me almost a whole year to finish. So I started it back in February of 2018 and ran through almost I guess until like January of 2019. It's called The Spirit of Utopia by Ernst Bloch, and it was written back in like the early 1900s, and it's a philosophical book, but he goes pretty deeply into the middle section of the book is called the philosophy of music, and it's not like any other philosophy that I've come across, and it's like he goes pretty deep into the actual like kind of music theory of things, and I had to skim over some of it as I was going through because I frankly just don't know all that much about music, but the reason that I did learn about this book, funnily enough, was I was listening to a mix on Soundcloud where the introduction like really caught my ear. He was talking about how the the way that we are kind of always in like pursuit of utopia, like there's perhaps never going to be a utopia, but that the idea of utopia is something that instead we're always striving towards. It really resonated with me. It's something that actually made a lot of sense. What would you portray a utopia as? It wouldn't really make sense. Like it would become stagnant really quickly, and then you get bored, and then somebody would introduce some chaos, and then all of a sudden you wouldn't have a utopia anymore. So it's just an idea that you would be chasing after, and so I heard that quote in the SoundCloud mix. I tried to find who it was from, stumbled upon this book and started reading it. And so the middle section is this philosophy of music, but then the kind of the bookends of this, one of them is actually, I have the book here. I don't remember the first section. Starts off with the production of the ornament, and then the last part of it is broken. I guess there's the shape of the inconstruable question, and then the final, the closing, really the climactic part of it is Karl Marx, Death and the Apocalypse. And I haven't even really fully digested that piece of it. There's like tons and tons of amazing quotes in there. Like I was just underlining and highlighting like all sorts of different pieces of that. But that first part, the production of the ornament, I was just I was really like taken in there, and so maybe the first 50 pages or so of that, I was kind of drawn into the book, and then all of a sudden it was like the philosophy of music, 100 pages or so, and so that's really where I got stuck with the book. That's kind of why it ended up taking the full year that it did, but I had faith that because that first 50 pages of the book had been so good that the last 100 pages or so were also going to be really like a revelation. And sure enough, like there's just a lot to unpack there that I'm still kind of working through, but I'm excited to kind of finish that off. But there are some ideas in there that I just kind of wanted to talk through, because I've been jotting stuff down, but again, by the time I've written some of this stuff down, like my hands are getting tired, and it just gets easier to talk through and explain a little bit. So one of the ideas in the production of the ornament, that I thought, if you really boil that piece down, with the production of the ornament, the idea kind of being that if you're creating things in the world, every little piece that that you put out into the world, that has a life of its own in a way, and then that goes is out living its life in the world and interacting with other beings, and other people are having their interactions with it, and if it makes its way somehow back around to you, sort of that bond that like you have now, it's almost like the two lives like coming back together and intertwining. You become more than yourself like in that moment, and it's just really like a fascinating idea to think that like if you crafted like a chair, for example, and he uses the example he uses is like a jug, and it's just it starts off and it's so simple, but it's also so eloquent. Like I was fascinated by it. It's a couple of pages, but he's talking about this jug and like carving into like this wooden object, and people can use the jug, it can get passed all around, and you've put your workmanship into this, and by the time it makes its way back around to you, it's lived a life of its own, really, and you've lived a life of your own, and if you return, like if that jug somehow makes its way back to you, just like that merging, all of a sudden, like I guess like just that sense of like divergence and convergence, like coming back together, knowing that you had made that, and that a piece of you sort of in a way had been off doing its own thing, and then had come back together with you. Like in some way it's like I guess in like a childish way, almost like the Harry Potter Horcrux type idea, where you're like splitting your soul off, and if you're, if you're in a factory and making like thousands and thousands of items, like if you think about like you're splitting off your soul and just all of these different things, and that the idea of like when he talks about the production of the ornament, like the ornament is important because when he's talking about this jug, it's hard, it's handcrafted out of wood, and it's not something that you're just making in a factory. So it's important that you really put your craftsmanship into this. So there's almost a bastardization of already early on in this book of things happening where people start to break them down into their component parts and just not see them for kind of the whole, the life that makes up the whole. And so by breaking them down and sort of taking that life away from them, and just thinking that like, oh, if you're just a shift worker and you just are working on, I don't know, let's say like you just work on like the handle of the cup and you never see the cup come into fruition, then you can make like thousands of these handles, but you're sort of like splitting your soul out into the handles, but it's not quite the same. So you're already seeing like he's laying the foundation early on for this, like all the way at the end of this book, for this Karl Marx Death and the Apocalypse, and the Marx idea is being laid very early on, and it's just him talking about hand carving a wooden jug, and it's fascinating. Like he was writing this back in the 1900s and early 1900s, I should say, and I'm really happy that I got to come across this book just from listening to this mix on SoundCloud, and it was almost really was separate from me coming across some of the like economic and political leaning videos that I was listening to on YouTube. Interestingly enough, like it sounds fairly apolitical, like the Spirit of Utopia. There's nothing specific in there that stands out and says, oh, this is going to be like kind of all have this Marxist twist on it. And I certainly wasn't going into it thinking like, oh, I want to like go into this deep like economic dive here, that I'm gonna go on this path for the next year or whatever. And the undertones of the book, I would say, are like that all the way throughout until you get to kind of the end. But this was sort of like a parallel track that I just came across, and then I happened to be sort of developing with the videos that I happened to be watching like several months down the line later. So it was just something that I happened to pick up, but very early on in the book, like I was already captivated, and then within the philosophy of music section got a little lost. But I mean the next section that I'd like to kind of really sink my teeth into is that final section, and I'm sure I'll have a lot to say on that piece. I'll probably have to break it up into a couple of different videos because I've been writing like pages and pages in a journal. Like I just finished a journal off. I mean, I had other stuff in it, but I ended up like finishing a journal because of this book. So there's clearly a lot to digest here, and this is kind of just the beginning. But one thing too that I kind of wanted to bring into the conversation in regards to sort of the creativity and the idea of this utopia that's kind of one step beyond what's talked about or what's covered in the book here is something that I think is talked about in the sort of more current political climate or current economic climate, however you want to spin it, is people saying maybe, if you were to get a little bit of extra money or extra time away from your job in the capitalist system, and you were to just get some you were to get the ability to, be creative and try to maybe play the piano or do some painting or just try your hand at a new skill that you don't already have, try to make a wooden jug that you might not otherwise try, right? I think that's something that a lot of people sort of see as a progression, a logical progression of sort of social democracy towards maybe socialism, just giving you some extra freedom to try things that you feel like, you're chained to your capitalist job in the current system, and you don't have that freedom that you just wish you had a little bit more free time, right? That's, I think, a pretty logical step that a lot of people are looking for. And I feel like in some ways, like, I want to challenge maybe that assumption a little bit, because it seems just a little bit too simplistic. Like, I don't necessarily see a lot of people just saying, okay, like, I've got some extra time now, I'm just going to start being creative with that time. I feel like in the, in college, for example, right, when people are outside of class, it wasn't like people were just picking up extra hobbies necessarily. Like, there's a lot of people just finding ways to waste time, especially now, like, and I guess also this is sort of cliched, but like to say people just find time to waste on the internet and with like various like gaming systems. And I know that there's productive things to do with the internet too. I mean, like, I'm uploading shit onto the internet and, putting things on YouTube and stuff. So like that, is productive, I hope, or I guess. But I don't really see that like having extra time maybe is going to give people skills. So I'd like to maybe challenge the assumption that just because we're able to, push a democratic socialist system to get people, that $15 minimum wage, or to, get a little bit more freedom, that then they're going to be able to use that to develop themselves and to feel more empowered, and just to kind of start the ball rolling towards kind of this the proletariat class being able to slowly start rising, to bring this rising tide of like class consciousness. I think that there needs to be something else that is going to help bring some sort of consciousness. And this, like, of all people, like, this was just this was blowing my mind, but it was kind of hilarious. This episode of the Joe Rogan podcast, this guy Duncan Trussell, who he was literally dressed up as like a weed leaf, and he speaks in like this really like high-pitched voice like this, and like he's just going off, and like I was just laughing the whole time just listening to him. But like, he has been studying Buddhism and is a really just, I don't know, like, very confident, but at the same time humble person. Like, he's very well put together, and he knows that he shouldn't push his ideas on other people. he's just kind of like staying in his own lane and wants to help other people, but isn't doing too much to try to force that. So where was I going with this? So so he was talking about like the kind of hive consciousness of humanity, and it was a really fascinating idea of like how if you go up in space and you look down and you see, like, astronauts talk about how if you see all the different cities, like they all basically just, at the end of the day, they all look so similar, and yet we have the idea that we need to like bomb other people because of the different ideologies that people have, and the wealth structures that are in place, and even like he was talking about like the data that various people control, which more and more is becoming a thing, like with every passing day, like the actual just like databases that companies are building up, which is another episode of all of its own, I guess, or maybe not, but so he's talking about this kind of hive idea, and instead of like one person at a time learning to play piano and having that be the way that people are able to kind of just fight against the capitalist system, like that almost seemed like a way where if everybody just found some sort of connection, and it's definitely a very like Buddhist or like meditative idea of like really just forgetting the self and like breaking out of the self and like falling into the flow of like sort of all beings, and like finding love for all beings, which it starts to sound very woo woo very quickly, but like you don't want to force this on everybody, but like if you could imagine just like the whole like underclass, just like everybody meditating at once, and then like the 1% of capitalists just being unsure what to do, right? Like they don't have that workforce anymore to capitalize off of, because everybody else is just like, look, we're all here, we're all on the same team, all 99% of us understand what we're here to do. And I mean, it's a half-baked idea, I guess, but it just, the other part, the other idea too of like the give somebody like an extra 2 hours a day or whatever, like have the 30-hour work week instead of the 40-hour work week, also to me it just seems like a half-baked solution of you're not gonna fight like these people who have trillions of dollars with a couple hours extra a week. Like you're still gonna be slaves to the wheel. So I think that like there just needs to be maybe some bigger ideas, and like if they're coming from Duncan Trussell when he's dressed up as a weed leaf on the Joe Rogan podcast, so be it. Like good ideas can come in all shapes and sizes, and I think with that that's a perfect place to wrap it up for the day. And I'm not sure if the next episode will be some more of the Spirit of Utopia review, or maybe something else will come to me, but for now I will head out and talk to you guys again soon.